from the J.C. Newman Cigar Studios in the great state of New Hampshire and the Gurkha Cigar Studios in fabulous Las Vegas, Nevada. Welcome to the Smokin Tabacco Show with your hosts, Matt Tobacco and Kevin Acuff.
No.
You know what? I just realized we were... Okay, this is the third week in a row that this happened.
Oh, was it muted?
That was muted. Again. And it's funny because every week I fix this. I go into the scenes and I'm glad... you know what? Honestly, I'm happy I caught it now because we only were like a minute in. So we can fix that. But it's weird because I don't know what it is. So the way this broadcast system works, there's an overlay window here. And you go into this and actually scenes, and you open this, and it's my preset settings for every scene in the broadcast. So like there's the welcome screen, there's the guest screen, there's the news, all the segments, and they all have presets for the audio mixing. Now this happened the last couple weeks, and I was like, why does this keep happening? And it was driving me nuts. And I went into the settings here for this page, and I went in and I looked into the mixer settings, and it was unmuted, and then I locked it because you can lock it so that way like things don't get moved by accident. And I'm like, all right, that should solve that. Like, I got the scene locked, and then we start, and it's like it's muted again. I'm like, this is driving me insane. And anytime there's a problem with this broadcast software, it's called Ecamm, by the way, for those watching. I blame John Carney because John Carney's the one that set all this up 4.5 years ago when we first started doing the show. 5 years ago, he's the one who was like, I got this great software, you're gonna love it. And it was very complicated, but over the years I've gotten better with it. But yeah, it's kind of finicky. So, but I'm glad we fixed that. Anyway, welcome to the show. Pat is with us now. As I said, Pat Chamberlain is our newest member of the Smokin Tabacco team. He's going to be with us every week. He'll be on the shows. He'll be on the Spare Note show with Coop, too. He's going to get to hang out with Coop, which I'm sure you're very excited for because you know how Coop can be.
Oh, yeah.
He's got a lot to say sometimes. He'll talk to you about Miami forever. And we have our guest with us here tonight, who I'm going to talk about in just a second, and he'll back me up on that. He knows Coop in Miami. I'm going to hear about it this week. Last week I was down in Miami for Lozono. Let me tell you about Magic City. And he'll go on his rant. But anyway, I love Coop. So we're here. And like I said, Kevin Acuff is no longer with Smokin Tabacco. I think I had mentioned that last week, like I said, but just so people know where he is. He's no longer with us. But I do have a guest with us tonight. We have a guest with us tonight. I got to get used to that. It's an old friend, an old face that we know and love.
Mm-hmm.
He used to be at the Premium Cigar Association, where you interned for a while. Trade show, all that. People know about it. But he's no longer with the Premium Cigar Association anymore. He has left, much to many of our sadness. 'Cause we loved having him at the PCA. But he's moved on, and he's taking on bigger challenges in life, which, you know, I got to give him credit for. You know, he's a great guy, and I think he's doing some great stuff. But he's now over at the Cigar Association of America, something that a lot of people may or may not have heard of. And how is that different from PCA and Cigar Rights of America and TAA? People hear all these organizations, right? Well, he's going to talk to us about what they are, what they do, what he's doing. It's our old friend, Scott Pearce, from the Cigar Association of America. It's weird to say that. It's so weird. I'm so used to the PCA, but now here he is. It's Scott Pearce. He's back. He's back with us. Finally.
Gentlemen, good evening. How is it going? Thank you for the wonderful introduction and the very kind words. I appreciate that.
Oh, you know what? Nothing but the best for you.
Thank you. And I've got at least one half of the name of the show, Smokin Tabacco. I at least have tobacco here, but because I'm in a house right now, then I won't be able to light up. So you guys have to light up for me.
That's okay.
I at least have the cigar with me, so that's good.
Well, you get the props. You know, you get the props. People usually, if they can't smoke, they get the prop ready and they talk about it. So you get the A for effort. I mean, what are you gonna do?
Yeah, I can at least chew on it. Well, it was funny. We were down at our annual meeting just last week, and we were in a hotel. We couldn't smoke inside of it, and so Arthur Zaretsky, one of our members from Famous Smoke, the online shop, he's got it in there, and he's just chewing on a cigar throughout the whole meeting, throughout the day, and everything else to tell. I mean, it's not like we don't have multiple receptions and things where people go outside to smoke because we're down in Florida. But yeah, he was chewing on a cigar throughout the whole meeting. It was great.
Yeah. It's funny. I remember as a kid, and Pat, I don't know about you, but I used to see like guys like chewing on cigars, like before they would chew on them, then they'd smoke them after. And I'll be honest with you, I don't really see that at all. Like, I mean, regular cigar smokers, I feel like that's not as much of a thing. But I feel like now, today, I don't see anyone chewing on them anymore.
If you worked at a lounge, you would.
I mean, I used to spend time in lounges like all the time before I settled down and became a family man.
How's the baby doing, by the way?
She's great. She's great. She's growing like a weed.
Well, that's good. That's what they're supposed to do.
Yeah. She's wow, every week is something new. She's just about to walk now, and she's saying more and more things. Not really coherent, but it's just a bunch of babble. But it gets a little bit more like more understandable as the weeks go on. Like she says "Dada" now, and I swear
Perfect.
she can say "Hi,
Dad."
Dad."
Savor that time. Yeah, savor that time because eventually very soon she's going to learn how to talk back, and then it's all over. So.
It's like, Dad, go away. And it's like, I remember when you used to babble and it was cute. Now it's not so funny anymore. I know it'll come. But but no, she's doing great. She's doing great.
Good.
Thanks
How's
for
Nicole?
asking. She's great too. The whole family's doing good. We're all still here, but Nicole's still around. But she's just a little bit more busy with her job and her career. So, but everyone's still here and everyone's doing good. Thanks for asking. And I hope you guys are doing well too. It seems like you guys things are going well down there. And I know you mentioned doing a move and your job has changed, which we're going to get into. So, life looks good for you.
Yeah. Going well. Thank you so much. Yeah. Well, give my best to Nicole and tell her I said hi.
Absolutely. She'll love to hear that from you. But anyway, what were we? Sorry, what were we talking about? We were talking about you. We're talking about you. Things have changed for you, and we're gonna get into that in just a second. But I know you're not smoking with us, but we are gonna go through some of our segments really quickly as we get the show started. Our cigars are once again brought to you by the number 2 guyscigars.com. That's right, the number 2 guyscigars.com. You'll find an amazing selection of cigars and accessories, that some of which you may know and love, some of which might be new to you. So order some today. Order some of the things you love, but order a couple of things that are new. Discover some new favorites. Don't be a brand snob. That's what I like to say. There's too many choices nowadays, and there's too many companies at the trade show, and we don't walk through 200 booths at the trade show so that you don't know about them. So try things. Try new things, and order them from the number 2, guyscigars.com. Scott, I know you're not smoking with us tonight. I don't know if you have a band on that cigar. What cigar is that, if you have?
This is actually a cigar that Amir Rustam from Platinum Nova gave me when I was visiting their offices a while ago. Just a special batch that he made. They don't sell them. It's just they got an interesting private lounge that they have that they just used to smoke there. He makes special batches sometimes that he'll give to business partners and things like that. And I think he made a batch of these, and he gave me a handful. And I guess it was for a Saudi prince, so one of the princes over there that he does business with, and he gave me a handful of them. So I pulled this one out because I got a few more left in my humidor. So
very, very cool. Very, very cool.
Yeah.
I've been down there as well. It's a nice little setup. They got all the cars in there and everything too, down in Delray.
So that's their office. They've got a lounge in West Palm. It's funny because you go. They were originally thinking it was going to be a retail shop, but then they just were like, "No, we like it just being our own private club." And literally, you walk in. It's a beautiful lounge. It's got a bar there, the nice espresso machine, and everything else. And then they have a humidor, and they have a bunch of their products and different things that are in there, and a few others that are in there. But it's a great little lounge. It's sort of their own private little oasis.
That's very cool. I'll have to check that out next time I'm down there. But anyway, Pat, what are you smoking with us?
So I'm smoking the Ashton VSG Torpedo,
Ooh,
which in my opinion is the best wrapper on the market on a regularly produced cigar.
Well, that's
My
a
opinion.
bold statement.
That's just me.
That's a bold statement.
But no, I do love it. It's that.
It's a Fuente-made cigar, is it not? So I think that you're probably in good company with a lot of people that believe the same. So.
Yeah. Pat's a Fuente guy.
I mean, it's a competitive market, so I mean, like, maybe a few years ago that would stand more true. But I mean, it's at least personally, it's one of those cigars I reach to often because it's readily available. You can get it, but it has like that same kind of aurora behind it that you get with sought after cigars.
Yeah.
So it's just very good.
I mean, Ashton's a very reputable name. They've been around a long time. Like Scott mentioned, they're made by the Fuente family. They're made in a good factory. They got great quality control. They use great tobacco. I mean, it checks all the boxes. That's one of those brands where, even very casual cigar smokers, they know the name. I talk to a lot of people on a daily basis. I'm sure, all of us do. And even the people who don't smoke like we do, they're like, oh, I like cigars. What do you like? Oh, the Ashton's there. And I'm like, yeah, probably the classics. And they know the name. They know the name. That's a very good cigar. That's one of my favorite blends, actually. Back in the day, I used to smoke a lot of those. And then for no reason at all, I just, I get wrapped up in all the other stuff now that's always coming out. And a lot of the other stuff I used to smoke casually back in the day, sometimes I forget about, and then it pops up. Someone smokes it, and I'm like, I haven't had one of those. I gotta have one. It's been a while, and I'll smoke it. And I'll be like, why did I wait so long? Like, there's a lot of stuff and I'm sure, now that you worked in a retail store, so you're around stuff all the time.
Yeah.
But there's probably stuff that, because you get new inventory in, and it's like, well, you guys try this, and you guys smoke this, and then there's stuff that you probably forget about, and I'm sure Scott, you've probably been there too. It happens, and then you go back to these cigars, and you're like, why have I not had this in like 2 years? This is dumb. Like, this is a good cigar.
Yeah.
It's always the OGs too, like the ones, like all the blends that like have stood the test of time.
Yeah.
Because like typically when you first, like in my case, I started at Twins and I had all that. Like one of the first cigars I smoked was the Oliva Milanio. So I knew it was a good cigar. And then 2 years goes by, you're trying to smoke that whole humidor, then you haven't had like one of the staples in a while. So I got reintroduced to the Oliva like I think 2 years into Twins, and I'm like, oh my god, why don't I smoke this more often? But then like another shipment of new product would come in, and I'm like, oh my god, what is an Oliva? Yeah. So there is blends that you don't forget about, but you just get caught up with everything else that's releasing and all the new stuff, all the stuff everyone's talking about. You just don't go back to it. You know,
Scott, I'm sure you're in the same boat because even someone in your position, it's like.
Yeah,
you're kind of always smoking different stuff too because you got manufacturers like, hey, Scott, like, have you had this? Have you had this? Have you had this? And then you got to like try new things. You got to stay on top of what's going on in the business, and it's a lot.
Yeah, down at our annual meeting, Glenn Wolfson was there and pulls out a bag of Drew Estate cigars, and he's pulls out a Lancero of a Liga 10, I think it was, that they were working on, haven't been released yet, and he's going with them. And so he hands it to me, and the Lancero, the Lonsdales, and the Coronas and Petite Coronas are kind of my favorite sizes, right? That's my wheelhouse. I love the thinner ring gauges. And I just got to sit there and enjoy that. So yeah, to your point, right? And then this thing too. I mean, there's so many of them that are so unique in that sense, and I love the whole essence and experience of smoking and getting to savor it. Funny story about the Ashton, not really funny, but it just I went and saw a comedian. My wife and I did a couple months ago, and went and saw Jeff Dye. I don't know if you've heard of him or not, but funny comedian. You can look him up. Last name is DYE. But he had a meet and greet afterwards, and there's a poster of his that he was selling, and he's smoking a cigar. And so I went up in the meet and greet, and I was like, so do you really smoke cigars, or was that just a picture, like a knockoff of the Clint Eastwood? He's like, no, I love cigars. He's like, sober now, but he's like, that's my one thing. And so I was like, hey, well, there's a couple blocks away. There's, the Casa de Monte Cristo, and I just gave him the manager's name and everything. I was like, just tell him I sent you. And he's like, write your contact information down too. So, but he was telling me how much he loves the Ashton was like his go-to cigar. Like that's the one that just like you, Pat, was one of the first ones he smoked and he loves and everything else. So I get a text like 2 or 3 days later. It just says Scott, and I was like, didn't know the number. I was like, who is this? He's like, hey, it's Jeff, the comedian. And he's like, I went to your cigar spot, man. He's like, but I totally forgot your information. So I ended up just sitting downstairs by myself like a loser. And he sent me a picture of him smoking in Ashton outside in the lounge at that Casa de Monte Cristo.
Well, that's fun. It's funny. Speaking of comedians, it was last year. I wasn't at the one last year, but speaking of Two Guys Cigars, they had their anniversary party. Now they got the expo thing, and they had Bill Burr show up. And I wasn't there, but Carney was there, and I was like, so, like, you know, how was Bill Burr? Was he like a dick, or was he's like, dude, no, he was a good shit. He was like, he hung out with everybody. He said hello to everybody. He hung out with people. He was, you know, he was telling jokes, and he was like, he was a good dude. He took pictures with everybody, and I was like, wow, that's awesome. And you know, because you know how sometimes these things go. It's like you're like, oh, how was so? Nah, he wasn't really friendly. It's like he had to be there, and then he got out of there. He's like, no, Bill stayed like the whole time. You know, so yeah, it's funny. And I know like Lenny Clark, you know, he's local, you know, around here, and he's in cigar shops all the time. You know, people run into him, and he's always got cigars with him. He's been in all the shops up here in New Hampshire. I know I've seen pictures of him. I'm pretty sure he's been to Twins. Mm-hmm. He's been to Two Guys. You know, he's always floating around too. So yeah, I mean, it's what we need. We need the people that people know, like bringing recognition to the industry.
Well, that's kind of what I was at PCM when we were talking to the Handled guys, and they were talking. They're like, "Hey, do you want to do?" We were talking about different projects, and I was like, "Well, as a retail organization, I was like, you guys are telling stories of manufacturers. That's great." I was like, "But there's a way for us to tell interesting stories about the retailers that you guys were looking at," and that's why I started to do and looking at basically the popular zeitgeist that's going on right now, and just did this whole point. Right, there's a whole swath of comedians that smoke all the time on their podcasts and on their shows and everything. So I was like, "Is there something interesting we could do that can kind of capture that?" And so that's when we had Bobby Kelly and go do that show with Jeff Borshowitz and kind of that whole thing. And I know they did a video of it. I know they're often doing the other things with it now and everything else. But that's to that point is that the more we can kind of pull this in and that connection of like just like you said, being able to be at some place like a Two Guys or a Twins, the place you love going to, where you get these guys that love it too. It just sort of helps grow the public profile of why people love smoking cigars and getting together.
Yeah, I know, I fully agree. And you know, anytime there's an opportunity, I try to either if I'm involved somehow or someone else, I'm like, you know, this is great. You know, like we try to celebrate that, champion that, like, you know, getting more awareness to it. And you know, we've had a few kind of known name people on the show, and you know, which has been nice, I think, you know, because I don't look at it so much for, you know, just having them on the show. It's like, well, it's someone that'll come on the show and people watch the show. It's like, oh, he smokes cigars, and like, I think it kind of helps, like, you know, and encourage people, you know, like, oh, like, you know, like, kind of, you know, build our community. So, but before we go too much further, we got to talk about our other friends who are with us every week who help us cut and light our cigars. So, I'll put some of these in front of you. I keep moving them because I have like this OCD about keeping everything organized, and I'm used to being here by myself. So I'm trying to learn how to share the space again because it's been a while. But we had our friends from SD Dupont with us, featuring the Line 2 from the new Gradient collection. This is the blue. I think you got the black one over there. SD Dupont, shake up the legacy. Fantastic products. They speak for themselves. They stand the test of time. It's a premium product. It's also most of them are handmade. The Line 2s are all handmade. I think some of the other ones might be, you know, a little bit less, you know, more machine made. But the Line 2s are all, from what I understand, the Line 2s, the Legrands are all handmade, just like the cigars that, you know, people light them with. Made in France. They're beautiful. They're works of art. But like I said, they'll stand the test of time. And ask your local retailer for SD Dupont products today. So Scott, let's put you in the hot seat here. Let's get you going. I know Pat's got questions for you, so it's not all going to be just me tonight. I'm going to give the quick little... Tony, how's it going? I'm going to give the quick little refresher for those who might forget who you are. Although, I don't think there's many who do. You were formerly the executive director of the Premium Cigar Association. Among the many things that you did over there, I know you were involved with, you know, legislative stuff. You met with manufacturers and you met with all sorts of people, but you also had a huge part in the annual trade show that happens every year, which I think that you did a great job with the last few years. And I think that the reason why that show started to turn around was, you know, not just because of you. There's a lot of great people over there, but I think you had a lot to do with that as well. And I even though you're not with them anymore, I always want to mention that because I think that when you were there, those shows were some of the best shows. But you have moved on. That. Yeah, of course. It's well-deserved. I mean it. But you've moved on, and now you've moved to another organization I think a lot of consumers are not as familiar with. And I think there's a lot of reasons for that, but I'm hoping to at least get them a little bit familiar with it, especially with a face that I think a lot of them do know. You are now with the Cigar Association of America, which as you were talking about before, PCA is mostly like a retailer's organization, as is the CAA, which is the Tobacconists Association of America. Mm-hmm. The CRA is
like more consumer based. It was supposed to be consumer based, right?
Which one?
The CRA.
Well, the CRA, yeah, and Scott, you probably could speak on that a little bit, just because I know you probably know a little bit better. But yeah, I think, Pat, you're right. I think it's more geared towards consumers. They sign up, they get the membership, and they make their donation, and obviously all the things that they do that
like the packs every year,
all the packs to raise money,
the funding,
all the funding. But you're with the Cigar Association of America, which is more of a manufacturers organization. And you're the president of the CAA, is that okay?
Yep.
So, first of all, I guess tell a nice introduction for people who are not as familiar. What is the CAA? What is the purpose of the CAA? You guys work mostly with the manufacturers directly. What does that mean? How does that impact the consumer? Kind of that kind of general overview.
Yeah. Awesome. Well, yeah, appreciate the opportunity to be able to kind of explain this a little bit. And you guys are exactly right. Obviously, PCA founded in 1933 as the Retail Tobacco Dealers Association or of America. I always forget that. But RTDA is what everybody kind of lovingly refers to it as when they first go to their trade shows. I've heard Jonathan Drew from Drew Estate talk emotionally about his first RTDA, and a lot of folks talk about it that way. And so it is a retail organization, although there was some chances. Miguel, how are you doing, my friend?
Miguel Shadell is with us. What's up, Miguel?
It's high praise coming from Miguel. I love Miguel. So as obviously it progressed and as the tobacco controls, we get into the modern era, we go through the cigar boom, we get into the modern era, the Tobacco Control Act changes a lot of things, and then SCHIP really is kind of what kicks it off before the Tobacco Control Act. Anybody who's familiar with CRA can correct me if I'm wrong here. This is my understanding, is that SCHIP happens. They're down in Texas. I think Glenn Luke was at the show. I think this is when the PCA was, or the IPCPR at that time, might have still been RTDA at the time, was in Houston. A group got together and decided to form a consumer rights group that would be akin to trying to take a little bit of the example of the NRA, hence the CRA aspect of trying to get the army of consumers engaged and involved in the grassroots efforts as far as policy was concerned, specifically as the SCHIP was looming and the taxation was coming, threatening to decimate the industry. That became even more obviously important as the Tobacco Control Act went into play, and then all tobacco then moved under the purview of the FDA, whereas before with cigars, it was really under the Department of Agriculture. It was a farming issue more than anything at the time. So then CRA has gone through, obviously, an evolution as far as what's involved there. Still, obviously, a strong consumer component to what's there, but they also do have a lot of family-owned manufacturers that are involved with the leadership of that organization as well. Focused very, very adroitly on premium cigars, as that's what those companies manufacture. So then PCA, obviously, everybody's familiar with that. So for the Cigar Association of America, 1937 is when this organization was officially founded. Cigar Manufacturers Association is really kind of what it was founded as. So when you look at the broad scope of the membership here at the Cigar Association, it's manufacturers, it's suppliers, and so when you think about suppliers, like the farms and the factories, they're not
the growers,
selling cigars, the growers, right? Importers, distributors, online retailers as well, and then we also have some folks like Smoker Friendly, for example, that belong as supporting members. There's a handful of supporting members that will come into that realm as well. We do have one brick and mortar retail, Open Door Cigars, who belongs as a supporting member. We don't really have a retail membership. That's not necessarily there, but if somebody does want to support, they can. And they were just at the annual meeting because he believes in participation at all levels. And so he's a great guy. And so, So the whole perspective of the Cigar Association of America is that manufacturer perspective. It's about 70% of the market share of all premium cigars. But then you also have to realize that premium cigars are only about 2.5–3% of everything of the cigar market that's sold. The rest of it, you're looking at popular price cigars that are out there as well. So what our primary focus is, one of the main drivers of it is government affairs services. And so obviously that's legislative at Capitol Hill here in Washington, D.C. But what's unique about the Cigar Association is that we've got 46 state lobbyists that we employ on contract throughout the country. It's the 2 Dakotas, it's Kansas, and Delaware are the 4 states where we don't have a full-time lobbyist that is employed by the association. And so we're very, very active. And so, one of the reasons why this was so attractive to me to come over here It's a lot more hyper focused on policy. I know, Jay, I know you asked to join. I can reach out. At the time, I wasn't very familiar with how everything worked. I got through my board meeting, and I will absolutely give you a call. Although, who is that? That's not Jay in that picture.
I was just gonna say who's this clean shaven gentleman? Like, that doesn't look like the Jay Davis that I know and love. Who is that guy?
Jay. We're being catfished right now.
I know. That's not the real Jay Davis.
It's not. No. I mean, where's the real Slim Shady, Jay? Come on. Anyway, so very, very hyper focused on policy at all levels, like I said, with that. And so for me, looking at this was a manufacturer said to me at one point, because Swisher is one of our big members and Imperial is one of our big members too, CAA. And he said, one of the gentlemen said to me, he said, yeah, right.
2 years ago, come on. You didn't look like that 2 years ago. At least I don't think so.
We all knew you 2 years ago, Jay. Who do you think you're fooling, Chief?
Don't be telling fibs. Come on. Sorry, Scott. It's getting us all distracted.
No, it's good. It's good.
It's Jay.
It's like getting the band back together. This is fun.
I know.
So again, hyper focus on that government policy aspect of it. So while I did some of that when I was at PCA, government affairs really is Josh Roberski's, that's his wheelhouse. And so I just, whatever I could do to support Josh, in terms of me overseeing and running the organization. But I mean, there's a lot that goes on at PCA that's outside of kind of just that focus. So coming here, I'm able to focus on a lot of different things. Again, it was a similar aspect as I was going through the process and talking to the leadership over at CAA about coming on board. Is they kind of had a similar request that when I first interviewed at IPCPR was to come in and say, look, we kind of need to evolve this organization in a couple of different areas that need attention that they quite frankly hadn't been paying attention to and wanted to put attention to. Knowing kind of what I had been able to do at PCA and kind of understanding my background, they thought that would be a good fit, and I agreed. And from what I explained to them in the interview process, which they then seemed to like me, so they said, "Hey, do you think that PCA would be too mad?" And I said, I'll talk to them and we'll see. And I said, if they are mad, that makes me feel kind of good that they don't want to lose me. But ultimately, it was amicable and they understood. I think I'll take them at their word. I think they were happy that I was at least staying in the industry to continue to kind of keep up the good fight. So.
Yeah, no, and that's why I genuinely I made comments at the beginning of the show because I think you are one of the good people in the kind of the role that you play within the industry and on that side with all the groups and all that. I think you've done a great job. So when I heard the news, I was disappointed you were leaving the PCA, but I said this is kind of, I was like kind of, I don't know if I would say excited, but I was definitely, I was interested and I was very intrigued. I'm like, well, he's going to go over to CAA now. I'm curious to see, what he does with that because, it's not really an organization that, as we're always talking about PCA, CRA, sometimes TAA, which, Coop and I have talked a lot about some of the issues there with TAA, with the media and stuff. But CAA is usually never really part of many conversations. And I know that it's different. It's more on the manufacturers and a lot of the back end stuff. It doesn't really directly involve consumers and retailers, which are kind of like the front lines of the industry. It's kind of more of the back part. So I know it doesn't really get a lot of spotlight, but at the same time, it's like, well, should it though? I mean, they do things too that keeps the industry rolling. And when you came on, I said, well, Scott's a great guy because I know Scott's very good with transparency, and you've always been good with the media. So I knew, once you kind of settled into this role, I'd love to have you on to talk about it because I feel like there could be more to learn about that group, and maybe there should be more awareness to it. I don't know. Maybe there are things that you guys do that people should be paying attention to. And I know with Pat, who Pat interned with the PCA. He's been around. He's been to the show. He's worked in a retailer. And I know he's got your legal backgrounds. I know you know a lot about kind of the stuff that Scott does. So I know talking about this show tonight. It was kind of like, we were talking about like, well, this is going to be interesting because, there's stuff that they do over there and maybe we don't know about it. And maybe, maybe there's, some things to learn there. And, should the public know about what kind of you guys are doing and should they be paying attention? So that's why I was very excited to see you in this role, to kind of see, where it went.
No, I appreciate that. And actually, I do think it is. And that's one of the things that I think is interesting is that, thank you, Jay. I really appreciate that. Jay was a great board member that I had the privilege of serving with. And yeah, not all superheroes have hair. This is very true. But one of the really interesting things is the state lobbyist aspect, right? And with lobbyists that are, from these states, they're at the capitals consistently. They're keeping an ear to the ground. But there are boots on the ground. And the thing is that, one of the aspects that I think has been challenging for the industry over the past several years is as we came into full focus of the FDA and they just went in full attack mode with all the body parts groups and all the antis, there seemed to be some fissures that started to kind of crack and break within some of the aspects of the industry. I mean that most particularly as it relates to how we approach advocacy, how we approach policy, and everything else. And I've said this many, many times, even back at PCA, it was a very understandable response that when you feel attacked, people tend to circle the wagons. And I always say it's almost like if your car is spinning, you want to turn into the spin out, whereas the natural reaction is to keep spinning, turning away from it. And we all kind of did that a little bit as an industry. And so one of the things I'm excited about, I had very good conversations with both Josh at PCA and Mike Copperman at CRA. One of my main goals was kind of ushering in a new era of coordination, because the more we can coordinate, the more that we can all be on the same playbook, the more we can manage messaging and everything else as it relates to our advocacy efforts, the better it is, the farther all of our dollars go, because we're outgunned as far as the finances is concerned. I mean, Michael Bloomberg alone, his wallet's bigger than all of our organizations combined times, I think, 4 or 40
right.
actually. So I mean, really, ultimately, that's kind of the uphill battle we're facing. And so really looking at a great 3-pronged approach in terms of how we can coordinate and be able to focus on what we, our core competencies, what we do best, and what we look at, what PCA, their core competencies, what they are best at, with how they function, and their stories as far as, retailers are concerned on the premium side. And then CRA, same thing, family-owned businesses on the premium side and the consumer aspect of it as well. So I'm really looking forward to kind of building out this kind of great, team network and environment where we're bridging these things. For us, one of the things as we went through our board meeting was getting a lot more, bolstering much more of our economics that we do here, because we're the only organization that does that. And it's critical to what we do with advocacy. And so you've seen a lot more of the reports that come out, Cigar Aficionado reports on, our import reports. We've got sales reports that we're doing. We're tied in with places like Placencia and J. Cortez and a whole host of other places, and a lot of the bigger companies that they ship in. And so we're really dialed in on this, and we're able to kind of splice them out in terms of little cigars versus large cigars. It's not exactly the same that a consumer would think of when you think of a premium cigar, just because it's old tax codes that existed long before lawsuits and things like that come up with. So it's really interesting to kind of look through the economics and the dynamics of the cigars. But to put the finer point on it, is it's critical in our advocacy messaging for a couple of reasons. The first one is, you can see the size and the scope of what cigars bring as far as tax revenues are concerned to states, and what the business is, and what the totality of employment as well as commerce happens within the industry. So it's very important in that component. The second part of it is the economics is a good story to tell on both sides of the aisle. But I like to tell the story often is that, Governor Polis in Colorado, a Democrat, vetoed the flavor ban there because it paid for his pre-K programs. And even further, I met with 3 Democrats a couple of weeks ago up on the Hill and talking with them, really, really positive meetings. One legislative director that was there had never had a cigar. By the time we were done, he's like, "Man, you got me so excited. I want to smoke a cigar now with you." So I go through this, and so I just said, well, if as long as your wife's not going to get mad at me that you smoke a cigar, I'm like, all in. I'll have you as my guest and at a lounge and we can smoke. But really, ultimately, when kind of going through and talking about the economics of all of this, the income tax is in place because of prohibition. They needed to figure out a way to collect more tax because prohibition went away, so there was no more sin tax effectively on alcohol. So what did they do? They created the income tax. And it was only supposed to be for this small amount, but now pretty much everybody pays income tax. The government's never going to get rid of a tax. Alcohol came back; they didn't get rid of it. So the question that we continue to ask folks is: look at the hundreds of millions of dollars that you are reining in off of these products. Particularly in our instance, with the flavor ban being front of mind, if you kill these flavored products, you're going to have several hundreds of millions of dollars of tax revenue that's not coming in and funding what you're doing. Where are you going to make up those taxes? You're certainly not going to increase your state income tax, are you? And if you are, good luck getting reelected. And so that's resonating quite a bit. The other part, too, that we're undertaking is much more economic analysis of how tax caps are working. We work a lot with our online retailers, obviously because the out-of-state excise tax collection that comes in. So we try to work a lot closer with our retailers, with PCA and retailers that are in states as they're going on and trying to get tax caps. And we've had some success when states finally realize, hey, we want to collect this out-of-state tax, for our constituents buying online and getting this excise tax coming into the state. We've had really good success at being able to connect with them. So we have another group that we also fund and help fund that goes in and kind of works with departments of revenue in each of these states to work with them to get as close to a uniform system as possible. But then we also can hopefully help get tax cap in on those bills as well. So a lot of work, a lot of moving parts, but we got a good team and kind of a good model that works. And so I'm just really looking forward to kind of dialing that and connecting that a lot more with a lot of what the PCA and the retailers do there, and how we can connect their state associations with the consumers in those places, cigar sales reps from our companies in those places, and then our lobbyists who are connected at the capitals with a lot of these folks and a lot of the policymakers.
Yeah, it's it's interesting to hear all that too, and I know a lot of these conversations we had with PCA, and Josh has been on, Glenn's been on, you've been on many times. You guys have all rotated. We talk a lot about this stuff, but it's interesting to hear kind of like the specific aspects that each of these organizations do. And we haven't had anyone from Cigar Rights of America on the show yet. It's something that we want to do, and I think we should probably make that happen soon. But to kind of get their take on their point of view, and so it's nice now that with you being at CAA to get that point of view of CAA and kind of what exactly is your focus, because maybe a lot of people I think don't understand that. So you guys are still involved, kind of the same kind of fights too, because it still involves everybody. It involves the manufacturers. They're making cigars, they put them on the market. And Pat, this stuff very well too. Regulations and stuff can be damaging. Talking about the flavor bans, that goes away. It's like Scott said. I mean, like that's hundreds of millions of dollars in revenue that gets taken away. It's tax revenue. It's money that the companies will lose. It's jobs that will get lost at all those companies. It's a whole thing. And it's like, well, because we don't want flavored things because we think it attracts kids. Even though, Scott, we had this conversation a few years ago with the NASM report that came out, and they did the whole study, and it's like we had this conversation. We're still talking about it, and it's like it's like. It's like you said, it's like the income tax, right? It's like this fight's never going to go away, and it's always going to be there, one form or another, and then people are going to try to come at this industry, in piecemeal, in some way, shape, or form. They're always going to try to find ways to take away from us, and it's nice to hear you say that you have these discussions with people, and you kind of turn it around on them. It's like, all right, so you're going to do this, and you're going to do this. You're going to lose a lot of revenue. You're going to make it up somewhere because you're not just going to lose all that money. So then what are you going to do? You're going to get it from places where it's going to hurt your reelection. And it's like, oh, yeah, you don't want to hear that. It's kind of it's a good tactic, too, because it's kind of stick it back on them. It's like, I don't want to be a dick, but, you do this, then you have to do this, and then people are really going to hate you. It's kind of like an intimidation with a smile on your face.
Because you think about, especially, in politics, it's a lot of the initial expressions of regulation is what sounds good, what does the public want to hear. And I think commonly in our case it's going to be protect the children, protect the public, prevent cancer, prevent whatever we want to assert it's going to be a problem. And naturally that's going to get people riled up, he's for the kids, he's public health. But then at the end of the day, too, government's also business, too. It's tax revenue. You rely on that money, and then your reelection ultimately relies on, having those proceeds. Yeah. So it's good to hear that that is a tactic, because at the end of the day, now this is a separate argument, because again, we can go into, is it really threatening the children? Is it really causing cancer to the degrees that they say it does? But that's a different argument. But it's. You can say all these things, but if you start doing the math, and if you do these things, then what's your answer to this? If you eliminate this portion of the industry and this revenue going to the government, what is your plan then? Mm-hmm. And, so that's an interesting take that Scott brought up there. But the other thing that I didn't know that I'd like to hear was how you guys have such a big state advocacy group, because I've always, and I think I said this when I was muted on the show a few weeks ago.
Yeah.
But from my perspective, I've always found that a lot of the battles at state level, especially the ones that are impacting consumers. I mean, obviously, the entire chain of the industry is going to impact the consumer ultimately, whether it's consumer, retailer, distro, manufacturer, supplier. Anything that's negative to any of those groups in the chain is going to ultimately boil down to the consumer. But, when I was doing work with PCA and my independent research, like a lot of big issues happen at the municipal level.
Mm-hmm.
And then typically that's how things spread. Like, I mean, I can go back to, I don't know what the year was when California said you can't smoke indoors. Like, it was like, oh, look what California did.
That was like 2001, 2002.
Yeah, it was
a while back.
I was very young because I remember like when I was super young, you could still have smoking sections in restaurants. But
I remember too.
I'd say around maybe mid-elementary is when like it was, you didn't see that anymore. Like you couldn't smoke indoors. But it started off like, oh, California's doing their thing, whatever. But then it starts spreading, and now it's a national thing, right? And then, like you see in Massachusetts, now we have generational smoking bans, which again, California's dabbled in it. I think it's been proposed. I'm not sure if it's
at the state level or within.
Yeah, at the state level.
At the state level.
Okay.
Yeah. So now, you look. Oh, you can go, Scott.
Go ahead. I was just going to say, with California, it was interesting. I literally just had lunch with our California lobbyists. They were in town, and effectively, we were talking about this. We were talking about how we've got to be a little bit more vigilant as it relates to municipalities, because the flavor ban started in Oakland. It very easy passed, and then it went from there, and then it became a statewide thing. But with California, our lobbyists were like, just consider it just one locality because they have a super majority, and so it doesn't matter. So if it can pass in Oakland, it can pass anywhere, right in the state. So things are kind of California's a weird state too. But I think that they have the flavor ban. We're going through an issue right now there with the registry and whatever else that they're doing. But actually, I'm 99% sure that Utah actually had a Clean Air Act before California did. And then California, for two very different reasons. Obviously, the Clean Air Act driven mostly by the Mormon legislature there in Utah, which is where I'm from. So I grew up hardly knowing. That's funny you say mid-elementary school, which was probably quite a bit later than mine, but I don't remember much smoking in restaurants. I remember smoking sections very, very vaguely, but I think in the maybe late 80s or early 90s is when Utah had their Clean Indoor Air Act. I don't remember much in the 90s of ever going into a restaurant where you could smoke or anything like that. But California followed, but California's was obviously for a very different pursuit than political pursuit. So Susie Wiles, not that I'm not able to, I don't have a ton to discuss. I really haven't connected with our Swisher folks there, considering the inauguration and everything else and what's kind of coming. We are kind of looking at, I've actually was just connecting with a contact tonight about who's in the Trump administration, asking if I had any inputs on some of the admin placements. As he's looking at stuff, so we'll take a look and see what we might be able to, look and see who they're considering for FDA and see if we can help maybe influence that a little bit. Or at least give some suggestions and see kind of where they're thinking, at least for the head of the FDA. So to go back to the earlier point with the states, that's one of the things we are focusing on in these municipalities is because, and that's why preemption is such a big deal for us, right? We don't want localities to be able to tax tobacco however they want to without any sort of executive oversight at the governor's level. And so we want to make sure that happens because instead of us having a 50-state tax fight that we would have to take a look at, which is more manageable based upon where we're at right now, if we had to do that with hundreds and hundreds of thousands of counties across the country, it's unruly, right? And that's I mentioned that a couple of years ago at the trade show where I just said, here's how we know we're actually winning right now. It's because our opposition is changing tactics. They're trying to go to these localities because they're trying to give us a death by 1,000 paper cuts. So, that's why for us that investment in all of these state lobbyists, and we meet with them regularly and consistently. And all I can say is thank God that state legislatures don't have the same, schedules as the federal government. Most of them meet for, 3 to 4 months or so at the beginning of each year. Some of them only meet every other year. So it is helpful. Sometimes it is a little bit laborious for us if we're trying to get things like cigar bar legislation passed or tax caps passed or other things done. But ultimately, it makes it a little bit more manageable for us at the state level. So we do have a good broad network of state lobbyists who many of whom have been with this association, with the tobacco lobby for 10 plus years at this point, and so they're very well versed and well connected, and so yeah, it's a good thing. I think the next phase of it really is to have a more visibility throughout the year when we're not in session, and more connection with local constituents, mostly through the retail shops, which I think is key. And whether that be C stores, which obviously sell a lot of products that CAA represents that may not be in premium stores, but also with the premium cigar lounges. And what we found really, especially when I was at PCA when fighting flavor bans, is that with premium cigars as the tip of the spear, makes a very, very effective tool in our arsenal to be able to kind of go through and cut through some of the stuff. Because again, the image of somebody smoking cigars. The second part of that then really is ultimately there's a much broader category that exists out there. Tax revenue is the story that exists there, but it's also literally the hundreds of thousands of jobs that those products support. And quite frankly, the other part too is just at a legislative conference last week, the youth usage of tobacco and smoking is down as its lowest levels in many, many, many years. So I'm not really sure where else they can go with it, because I mean it's so low. It's less than 0.1% at this point for the use of the premium products in particular. But cigar usage, even the nicotine pouch usage, is down at its lowest levels and has not gone up. So they're the antis and all the education they're doing is actually having an effect, and there's less youth doing any of those products now than in the last, I think, 5, 10, 12 years or whatever the case when they started kind of going through this. And so even the seventh wave of the past study that's come out, I mean, it's really down. And so across the board with all products. And so I think that, we have to be hyper vigilant, especially as it relates to premium cigars when they're starting to talk about nicotine now. So they continue to shift their focus. And this is really interesting because back in 2018, late 2018, maybe early 2019, when we got our working group at the PCA, we actually got a working group in the White House on the premium cigar issue. Because obviously that's when we were in the court case. And it was interesting because May Davis, who was counsel there at the time, said she was a little baffled that we actually got it done because it's such a small industry issue, and Trump doesn't care about cigars because he doesn't smoke. But nevertheless, we had the right connections and they got us working on this. And so May Davis actually made some calls to the FDA to try to find out what was going on. And when we sat down with her after that, she said, it's really interesting. When we go through and really ultimately all the FDA wanted to talk about, and the CTP, all they wanted to talk about was vaping, the skyrocketing youth usage and this epidemic and so on and so forth. And so they talked about the product. And she said, as soon as we start talking about premium cigars, it changes from youth usage to, it's the product, it's the amount of tobacco. And then they started talking about, the amount of nicotine that's in a cigar, and they started going on there. And how are we going to measure that because of how dangerous the nicotine really is? So that's still a frontier that they're coming after because of all of this new, modern oral nicotine products and other nicotine products that they have out there that they're focused on. And the thing is that it always, as it relates to premium cigars, the problem is that premium cigars are going to get caught up into it. No matter, yes, there is a definition, and yes, we can delineate, but Center for Tobacco Products is not Center for all tobacco products but premium cigars. So it's always going to exist. And so premium will be dragged into the conversation of nicotine because, again, they're going to look at this and say, look at how much tobacco is in here, look at how much nicotine is in here, and they're going to go after that as well. So we have to be hyper vigilant as far as that's concerned too.
And it was interesting, too, because going back to Brookline, Mass. So I looked through the memorandum of law, and it's when it went to the Supreme Judicial Court. And that entire memorandum, premium tobacco wasn't mentioned once. And actually, the most cited case was one of those cigarette dispensing machines that I've never seen one.
Those aren't even around anymore.
Yeah, but it was all cigarette-based. And then there was some due process arguments, which is typically like a Hail Mary, but there was no advocate for premium tobacco at all in there. And again, like you look at Brookline, like it's not really a prevalent industry there. I don't even think there's a shop there, to be honest with you. I tried doing some research.
I drove through there today. I don't think so.
So it goes back to like, and that's kind of, I think, and this could be a question to Scott too, is kind of what his stance is on trying to arm the consumer, because like the NRA, for instance, like we talked about the CRA, and like the NRA has like that same kind of name, but like when you look at like the consumer that's part of the NRA, each consumer is very passionate about rifles and guns.
You're not taking our guns away.
Anything is introduced, you don't need the lobbyists to say something. Like those, they'll go to the meeting themselves, right? Like,
right.
And you look at our industry, And again, like working in New Hampshire, where we typically get the Massachusetts people going down in up to New Hampshire because they can't, get cigars or get flavored tobacco there. They just go and do it someplace else. Like it's. I feel
they
like
all come up here.
A big solution. So everything that trade groups are doing is important because again, it's all those levels of the process of the chain. But I feel like what's underutilized in the industry is the consumer because that's really going to be the front line. And like again, like the work I did with the PCA, looking at like each and every state, like it's hard to even like with what the CAA is doing, which is huge. Like I didn't realize you guys had advocates in the states, but even one person in a state, it's a lot of work for one person, and you need like that front line or like that consumer like going to those meetings. I looked at when Bangor, Maine did their smoking ban. Again, it was there was one guy that was arguing against it, and you could tell that this is the guy that goes to every single meeting, and he just argues against whatever's being proposed. Like the guy, he had like half a suit on, just like a binder, just dropped it down. Is like, what are we talking about today? Oh, well,
Yeah.
But that's who's arguing for it. And again, there's no premium tobacco being represented in that meeting.
No.
And then with Massachusetts' concern, it's like now you have this ruling that the Massachusetts state constitution permits this kind of a generational smoking ban, which again, like the consumer now is like, oh, I'll just go to New Hampshire and buy it. But like, you're not thinking that, someone that's born like 10 years from now, like your daughter, for instance, say she wants to smoke tobacco in Brookline, like she can't fight for her rights right now at all, obviously, because she says, Dad, she's not really, she can't talk yet.
She's 15 months old.
Yeah. So,
yeah.
But now someone like that, like their rights are being impacted now based on, what's happening, and then there's no one fighting for that. From what I've been seeing, like the consumers are not being properly armed, and I don't know how much of that really like the burden is with the trade groups or retail shops, but I feel like that is a very underutilized thing, and especially now with what happened with the Meta decision.
Yeah.
And like we haven't talked about it yet, which this will probably be a separate show, but the Chevron decision getting overturned, like the industry can kind of take an offensive posture now, and I feel that the consumers would be a big push towards making something like that happen, especially at the municipal level at this point.
Yeah. No, that's very well said.
That's a great point there in terms of the Chevron decision, which presents, and now with obviously this administration coming in, presents a very, very good opportunity for us. And it's something that I've started talking internally with my group, and it's something that I'm already putting stuff in place now in terms of that. But it's the Overton principle, right? Where something seems, which is an advocacy principle essentially, which is something that's very radical, but then you're able to do things along the way that gets it towards more widely generally accepted. And so there's a lot of levers that we're going to need to be able to push. And we need to push all of them, right? And we need to be coordinated in how we do it because we're not massive. We don't have a whole lot of room for error here. But that's why talking about, things like the popular zeitgeist of the comedians and more popular people smoking and understanding kind of where that's at and getting more people to accept it and see it and, oh, okay, I understand this, right? The other part is obviously talking about, here's something really interesting in the conversation. For years and years and years and years, marijuana there's been this massive wave of people wanting to legalize marijuana. And all that they did was promote hey, look, there's no reason it should be outlawed because look at the health benefits, There's, marijuana's got a lot of good things to it. So now, what do we talk about? Well, the only thing people have heard for 30, 40 years, nicotine is addictive and it kills, nicotine is addictive and it kills, nicotine is addictive and it kills. I mean, you would literally think that you're eating shards of glass when you're smoking a cigar by the way that people talk about nicotine. Well, the fact of the matter is that it's not entirely true. Nicotine is very closely related, chemically speaking, to caffeine. Second of all, you're looking at nicotine, you can see a lot of prominent researchers, not the least of which is Andrew Huberman. You can find multiple podcasts with him where he's talking about this. Well, he does talk about the fact that, yes, there are side effects, and you need to be careful with it because it is addictive, the same way that you should be talking about things like marijuana as well. But he does talk about the fact that nicotine actually has a lot of benefits. It helps with focus. It helps with a lot of different things. And he also talks about that there is a Nobel Prize winning neuroscientist who will chew Nicorette gum because of the focus. But he also says that there's literature out there that supports that it would help stave off Parkinson's and dementia even, and Alzheimer's. And so there are others that are out there that will take nicotine nootropics for regulation of gut health. So there's a lot of benefit actually to that aspect. And so that's another part of what we're talking about here, which moves this Overton window to a point to where the public is finally like, well, wait a minute. Can we not have a better discussion about this than just simply prohibition, which we know won't work. All you're going to do is have this boom in illicit products. Tobacco is incredibly absorbent. If you outlaw flavors in cigars, all you're going to do is give rise to illicit products. And all we got to do is remember people like Freddie Gray, who were killed because of selling, outlawed cigarettes and things like that. Not he didn't get killed because of the outlawed cigarettes, but I mean, you're creating basically another opportunity for, as much as I think Josh Abersky would love to be Al Capone and be the Al Capone of illegal cigars. That's the fact of the matter, is that you're going to create an entire situation where you're going to have an underground illicit market for this kind of stuff and ways to flavor your own cigars. You're not going to get rid of the product. You're just going to move it and then lose out on all that tax revenue that you're getting anyway. So much of this really ultimately, to your point, is getting more consumers involved. The challenge with a cigar as opposed to guns, you don't casually own a gun. You either own a gun and you understand and reinforce that principle, particularly the right, that comes along with it, of owning a firearm, right, and what comes with that as a citizen of this country. Majority of cigar smokers, though, are casual smokers, right? If we're looking at the average 1.2 days out of every 30 days, you're not looking at somebody who is a super passionate hobbyist when you're looking at the totality of the X million numbers of cigar smokers that are out there. So that presents a challenge for how do we galvanize an army of cigar smokers. So we really have to be very, very sort of judicious in how we go about in getting that grassroots. So to your point, it's the constituents. If we can get a handful of constituents out there in every district, that's what we need engaged. The business owners that are incredibly important for these communities, which are listened to at that local level. And then we can engage our people that we pay on the professional side that have the relationships with the people that have been in local state governments for 30 years, that know how to move things, know how to grease the wheels, know how to do things within the committees to ensure that things can either get pulled out or killed or actually put in to actually promote. So those are all of the prongs that we have to get that are all synced up together so that everything will work in our favor. And NATO, Jay mentioned this, NATO is another good organization, National Association of Tobacco Outlets. So that would basically be the retailers that are out there, the C-store retailers that sell tobacco, so places like Quick Trip, I think Circle K belongs, 7-Eleven. They have a lot of those types of places. Very, very few, I think, sell a lot of premium cigars. Smoker Friendly is a big member of NATO as well. They do sell a lot of premium cigars, but a lot of them are other tobacco products. And so they're very, very interested and invested in ensuring that the entire category is protected. And it's something I started to mention back when we first, Jay and Miguel started coming on. But basically, there was a manufacturer who said to me, hey, look, if Swisher wins, we all win. And so that's sort of the perspective I'm taking here, is that, the Swishers and the ITGs, they're the biggest target right now as far as the tobacco world is concerned, or the cigar world is concerned, that the FDA has their sights trained on. And all the smaller targets are behind those bigger targets. If those targets go down, now everybody's in the FDA sights. So our biggest thing is making sure that we're not going to give any kind of inch, because if we do, that just means that the FDA then is closer and closer to being able to train its sights on everybody else.
Yeah, I mean, there was a couple different things you brought up there. One, the gun argument was a good one, and I agree. The way in terms of the consumer being involved. Scott, I understand your point too. With you said, it kind of the difference is you don't casually just own a gun.
Yeah, he hit it on the head. Like when he said that, I'm like, it's a very valid point.
But there's good on both sides. It's like, to your point, yes, like the gun owners, we're gun owners too. And like to Scott's point, we don't take it kind of casually. It's very serious, and we take all of our precautions, and we're very serious about it. All the safety and everything that goes into it. Of course, and he's right. It's not like just like, oh yeah, like I got one kicking around. Like no, it gets taken very seriously. Going to the range and working with people and learning about proper safety and all of that stuff. You don't do that with cigars. You roam into a cigar store one day and you start trying stuff and you just smoke it and you're like, I kind of like this. It's right. It's a different mentality. However, to your point, I understand what you mean in terms of the way that consumer base gets together. I think that is something that the average cigar smoker, that's the kind of mentality that they should have. Like Scott made a good point, but I think still it would be nice if more cigar smokers were like that, more aware, and like, hey, like don't take this away. Like you talk to the gun people, and it's like, you ain't taking my guns away. The cigar people need to have that same attitude. Like, you're not taking my cigars away. This is my Saturday night. This is what I do. Like, you're not taking that away. So it's true, and I think Jay had mentioned, we talked about this recently. The PCA has now opened up consumer memberships to, support the organization. Doesn't mean you get to go to the trade show and be involved with people directly, but you're helping, fund the PCA. You're being, engaged and aware. You know what's going on. In that aspect of it, I do think it's great. Coop and I have had a discussion on, pieces of how it was rolled out and whatever, and that's kind of a different topic. But at the core of it, getting consumers aware and connected with PCA is true. And that's why in the media, we always talk about it, and we always try to do what we can to bring it to all the listeners to be like, hey, you should be aware of this, and this is why, and that's why, again, having Scott on and talking about CAA, it's, even like you said, like you didn't know, and as I didn't know, how much they actually did have out there, and it's like, oh, that's good to know. Like that's a good thing. Even you guys have, people out there and doing their thing, and the average consumer probably doesn't even know that. And this is why like this discussion is important. It's making more awareness for everyone on like what you guys all do. And then the reason being is so how serious some of these threats are to the cigars that you like to smoke. And I swear there's people out there I talk to like casually, and I start to tell them these things and they look at me like, what? And I go, yeah, no, this is real. This isn't like a conspiracy theory. Like this is happening. Like go ask like retailers and people like in the know, and they'll tell you like go to an event where like Nick Perdomo or like Pete Johnson or one of those guys like Steve Saka and ask them like don't like ask them about cigars, but do yourself a favor. Ask them about legislative stuff and see how serious they get, because they'll tell you, well, yeah, this is a problem, and it's why people need to know.
Because like
and I think it's interesting. Sorry, go ahead.
Oh no, you go first, Scott.
Well, I was just going to say it's interesting. I think that when you get into an industry and it's not really regulated, I mean it was, but I mean not really, and then you go through a major shift where now you're in a highly regulated space. And so kind of getting our footing and matriculating through all of that, right, we're in a good place, and a lot of stuff is getting set in, and there were growing pains along the way. But I think one of the important aspects of the PCA membership, I think I have a little bit of expertise to be able to talk about it in a sense, whether or not this is what they were thinking, but I believe it was, because at least when I was there when we talked about it, was just part of the discussion. But to your point, right, the consumer element, one of the main reasons, as Jay points out, as far as the consumer membership is concerned, the alliance that they've dubbed it, is number one, it brings in other players too. It brings in places like golf courses and breweries and everybody else that does have some financial vested interest in ensuring that they can continue to sell these products as a good add-on, which does make them some good money too. But the part about consumers is getting them involved. It establishes a couple of reasons, but there's also a point here that I think is very, very important, and it also includes you all as the media in this equation. And this is kind of one of the things I talked about as well when I was there, and I think that now that this is a reality and the consumer memberships are going, is the connection of the consumer to the PCA trade show. And what I mean by that is not necessarily attending the trade show, but the consumers know the PCA trade show because it's the show, right? I mean, everybody gets giddy, you get to go there. I mean, the first time I walked on the show floor, it was sensory overload, and it's cool. I mean, like George Padrones handed me a cigar, right? You get to try all these things and see all these wonderful things, and if you're into cigars, it's the place you want to go to. So I get that consumer element of wanting to go to the show. But the reason why it's important is that the more the consumers are dialed into the show, the more that they can connect through you all. This is another reason why I talked to you guys about why I felt the importance of the media at the trade show was so critical, is because the media then connects to the mechanism by which this organization for the retailers has the means to fund what they do in order to defend themselves. And that the more that the retailers more consumers are dialed into this and can connect with their local retailers about the show, through the show, what products are you seeing, everything else, it underscores the importance to the retailers for their presence, a business reason for their presence to be at the trade show, which is a key driver in the economics of the trade show and of the organization. And so it's, I've said this in terms of CAA when we're looking at membership development with manufacturers. And I was like, look, if a manufacturer doesn't belong to CAA at this point, they haven't got the religion. I'm not going to go and proselyte to them and convert them now at this point. There has to be a vested business reason, right? And that's one of the reasons why I'm here now, is what are those business reasons we can get manufacturers to belong to the organization outside of just, because advocacy is a tough benefit to sell, because as long as there's one person that's willing to do it, everybody else gets it for free. And so they don't have to pay for it. And so you have a lot of retailers that are going to freeload off the PCA. They don't need to do it, right? Because, and I know that's a frustration, obviously, with a lot of folks on the CRA side too as well. But the more that the consumers through you guys can get dialed into PCA, what they're doing at the trade show, and can understand the importance of that trade show, and can connect themselves to those retailers that are at the trade show and are supporting that organization and can be a part of that, then that's the connection I think that needs to be made throughout all of this, is that then the consumers need to be able to ensure that they are telling their retailers the importance of that trade show, asking about the products they're finding there, to engage them so that that trade show can continue to maintain its importance as a business mechanism for the industry, because that will continue to fund in growing in increasing ways. That team, who's phenomenal, will continue to innovate over there. It'll continue to increase the way that they're able to fund what they do.
Now, Scott, one of the things I wanted to bring up with you, now that you've, I think we've this topic has come up when you were with BCA. Now being with another organization, I can't help but bring it up again. And I'm sure you've heard this from several people. I know you've probably heard this from several people, because I've had this discussion with certain people in the media and stuff like that. And I know that everyone, like, you do your thing, PCA does their thing, CRA does their thing. I think everyone kind of has the same mission to accomplish, so to speak, in the big picture. But I think day to day, everything's a little bit different. But I know, like, when the Meta decision came down, I'm going to use this as an example. When the Meta decision came down, and it was out there, and everyone kind of sent out a press release saying, like, oh, well, if it wasn't for us. And, I think one of the things that some of us in the media picked up on was, okay, so everyone was kind of involved in this, and everyone's trying to take individual credit for it. Then it's like, well, why do we have all these different organizations that kind of have the same objective, but yet everyone seems kind of so separated? And like, why do you think that is? Is there now that you've worked in multiple organizations, do you know what I'm talking about? Is there a reason why, like, it's not more cohesive? Is it just individual egos of identifications of organizations? What is it?
Kind of a lot of elements of all of the above. Again, you have a lot of folks that have poured their entire lives into creating and making these businesses, right? And like I said earlier about it's a natural reaction. I'm going to circle the wagons, right? And I was kind of thrust into the middle of this when I started at then IPCPR in 2018, when a lot of this was going on. My second day on the job, I was pulled up I was down in the Dominican Republic at the TA meeting, pulled up into a boardroom with the CRA executives and their board, talking about a potential merger between the two organizations and Consumer Day and how is this going to work and everything else. And my mind is just spinning with all the information. And I've got people like George Padron, Carlito Fuente, and Robbie Levin and Rocky Patel are all in the room talking about this. And I'm just trying to catch up and just sort of not be so kind of quote unquote starstruck, right? But really, so ultimately what you're looking at here is you're looking at people that have spent so much. I mean, this is legacy businesses. Carlito, his father started it. George, his father started it. They're carrying on this legacy. It means everything to them. And anybody who says they can't understand that, I don't really know how I can relate to the person that doesn't understand what they're fighting for here with their family business.
Sure.
Somebody like Rocky and the Levins who built Ashton, and then going for a little bit further with the Auroras and Pete Johnson and the Garcias with my father, just the amount of what people have put into these businesses and how much love and toil they've put into it. So of course they're going to passionately respond to what they're doing, and that's why they work through CRE to do that. As it relates to kind of the Meta decision, and it kind of relates to some of this, that goes back a long ways. I mean, really, I'm hoping it's more water under the bridge at this point, but you get a lot of personalities that had a lot of different ideas about how things should be done. A lot of disagreements, and like I said, personalities that quite frankly, just did not see eye to eye. And so within that, then when this decision happens, the other part too is that I think it was very important for some folks to claim that victory because they felt vindicated in a lot of ways. But the other part is I think that every organization wants to underscore how their place in all of this and the importance there. And it's positive PR. There's fundraising that can come off of positive PR. People want to feel good about the investments into these organizations. They want to feel good about the work that they've done. Do I wish that it was different? Absolutely. In terms of the way that went down, do I think it matters ultimately to the larger scheme of things for the mass majority of people that are out there smoking cigars? No, it doesn't. It doesn't. There's probably, I'll probably get in trouble for saying this, but I don't care. there's probably maybe 50 people in this industry that care about the inside baseball of what I'm just talking about in terms of the credit for the lawsuit and who did this and who did what or whatever else. The important thing is for the industry is that the judge ruled in our favor. All the other stuff is stuff behind the scenes that, quite frankly, it doesn't matter. I know it matters to some people, but the important thing is that we got the victory as an industry, right?
Right.
And then the other important aspect of it is, so where do we go from now, okay? So let's all be adults in the room and let's sit down and say, okay, let's figure this out so that the entire industry now, from top to bottom, is protected as best as we possibly can. And the best way for us to do that is that if we are all on the same playbook, we can all lean into our own strengths and we all invest every nickel that we all have without duplicating efforts and without wasting resources. That's the best thing for the industry. And we're going to get there. We are getting there. Things are already improving. But in terms of that whole thing there, I think it was a lot of stuff that really, quite frankly, I think was a lot of it was in a vacuum, to be honest with you. I think it spilled out, I think, for media folks, because it's something I think it's easy to talk about. But I think outside of a handful of people, I just don't think it mattered too much.
Yeah.
And I'm going to pivot off that because since Scott's here, I want to explain this with him because he probably has more of like an intelligent way to explain it than I do.
Oh, go ahead.
So
I doubt that. You're the lawyer, man.
But
I don't have the wicked awesome accent.
So I guess like where do we go now? So I'll mention the appeal just really briefly. So the Meta decision is getting appealed. I did see, because I watched the show when Josh was on. I think it was, a month and a half ago maybe?
Yeah.
It was recent. And he said he wasn't too sure how, like, the appeal goes, and you guys weren't really too sure. It's the facts on the docket in the record is going to be what the appeal is. So they're going to look at it. It's called de novo. So they just see if the law was applied properly to the facts in the case. So what's in the case is going to be what's being looked at on the appeal. So I just wanted to mention that because I saw that was a question at that point.
No, thank you for that. Yeah.
So what do we do now? So I'll go to Chevron really quick, just because I'll do like a quick legal 101 on what Chevron is for the people watching, because it is really important to know, because I think that's going to be the offensive posture that we take. So essentially, and also why the new administration is important, because I know everyone's talking about the new appointment for the FDA. So really quickly, just kind of going through this whole thing. So essentially, you have three branches of government, right? We'll go from square one: legislative, executive, judicial. So legislative makes law, executive enforces law, judicial interprets law. So only the legislative can make law. So what they do, because that's not practical, that all those people are going to be regulating, for instance, like you look at the EPA, Environmental Protection Agency, a lot of those legislators don't know anything about natural gas, right? So they make executive committees or administrations to essentially tailor law based on legislative intent. So legislatures will create an agency, and then the executive president appoints the principal person of that, and then the legislative can do the agents. So point is the legislature would make like the FDA, for instance, and then they have guidelines and they pass law that says like you guys will regulate this, this, and this. And then everything that agency does has to connect to that legislative intent. So the executive, they can't make law. So it has to come from somewhere, which comes from that legislative intent.
Okay.
So essentially what Chevron is it's a deference. So when in that case, when there's something that legislative intent didn't expressly touch on, it's called Chevron deference. So the court is going to defer to the agency because they know they're geared to make those decisions more than the court is.
The expertise. Yeah.
Yep, so to their expertise. So say like there's something that the legislative body didn't specifically say that they can't do, then there's going to be a deference to, well, this is something that they said we can do, and they didn't say we can't do this, and the legislative intent, this is achieving that. So essentially what overturning Chevron is you that presumption's not there anymore. So if you pass something and there's not some more concise way to point, like this is where we're getting our power to do this, then the court's not going to uphold that. They're not going to give that deference to that agency. There has to be something that they can point to, because the standard was if it's arbitrary and capricious, which just means that there's no rational relation, period, which rational relation is the lowest standard of scrutiny a court can give. There's no rational relationship to what this agency did based on that legislative intent. So it's big because now when legislatures are tailoring these agencies, they have to be more cognizant of what that ultimate goal is, because the agencies can't just take a kind of ambiguous broad body of law and then just completely run with it.
Yeah. That was a lot, but I follow through most of it. It makes sense. I know what you're trying to say. But yeah, no, I mean, but again, these are the things that are nice to just share. And that's why I'm happy to have you on board now, because I do like how you really understand this stuff, and this is a corner of the things that we talk about. And again, like Scott said, it's connecting like the organizations with the consumers, and telling the story. And but this right here is exactly why. But especially between the two of you, it's telling people like what is out there, but also explaining why in each of your ways. And like, well, why is it important? How is it going to happen? It's one thing to say like, well, there's a flavor ban thing, and we have to fight for it. And it's like, well, what exactly does that mean? How does that happen? How likely is this happen? These conversations I think are important and are great. I know that. And I'll say this, as I'm sure you guys already know, a lot of people probably think, this is a lot of dry stuff. But at the end of the day, if you're really, truly a lover of premium cigars, these are things that, like, again, you use the example with the NRA and the gun owners. It's like the cigar consumer, I feel, they're not as well-informed and they're not as connected with this stuff. And that's why we try to, have people like Scott and have Josh and Glenn and all those other people from all the organizations on the show to explain, guys, there's something going on here. And if you don't want to live in a world like a lot of parts of Europe, Canada, Mitchell, who's still a member of Smokin Tabacco but is on a medical hiatus, Mitchell was on the show all the time, and Mitchell lives in Canada. And Scott, you remember Mitchell, I'm pretty sure.
I do. Yep, I sure do.
And he'll tell you firsthand. He lives in a country like that. Tobacco tax is like 300%. Getting the New World stuff. First of all, their Cuban supply is not as great because they don't get as much, because now it all goes to Asia and parts of Europe, and then when they do, it's ridiculously expensive because Habanos are already so expensive now. Mm-hmm. And then you add the massive taxes that Canada has, and I remember him saying, a lot more people are migrating more towards New World cigars up there because of that reason. But even the New World as it's known outside the U.S., even some of that stuff that we kind of take for granted because in some states are better than that, like New Hampshire. We're very privileged. We don't have tobacco tax, and the retailers that we have are very good about their pricing models and stuff like that. But there are parts of the country where the taxes are higher, and retailers charge a little bit more, and but relatively speaking, compared to other countries where a lot of these things have gone into law and are enforced and regulated, I mean, it's nothing. I mean, I remember talking to Mitchell. It's like, bringing cigars back to Canada, like he can only bring so many. And, I remember the trade show one year, he's like, I can only bring 50 back, but like there was a lot he needed. And I said, well, can you bring 75? He's like, well, yeah, I'll do it. I was like, I hate to, but it's like, there's a lot of good stuff I want you to have. And it's, it's easier than shipping it to, and he's like, yeah. And he brought like 75 back. Those other 25, they pulled apart and said, these are your 50. You owe us $300 on those 25 cigars just for walking over the border. And it was like, I remember he told me, and I was like, what? He's like, yeah. I'm like, dude,
that's nuts.
That's ridiculous. And but this is the reality. This is the reality of like, look at the other countries around the world, and these are the problems that are trying to be brought here. And this is why people like the CAA, the PCA, the CRA, people like Scott and everyone we've talked about, this is what they do. That trade show we talk about, it's cool. Like Scott said, you're walking around and everyone's there. But again, like when you were at the PCA, it's why do you do the trade show? Well, because it gets everyone together. It raises money and awareness for the everyday fight that the PCA does, which is, all the people around the country and all the state stuff. And this is why the generational bans, like Pat talked about, the flavor bans, like Scott brought up. But then it brings up the tobacco taxes at the federal level, at the state level. Talking to Mitchell, it's like, if I was to give Mitchell $300, he'd be able to buy this many cigars if I give Pat $300, he's going to be able to buy this many cigars. And at the end of the day, the average consumer, not everyone's got plenty of money to constantly throw around. And, the average person walks into a cigar store, they want their money to go a long way. And they don't want to feel like, well, I can only buy 5 cigars and they're not going to be that great because, a decent, Paladin de Saka or, a Perdomo 30th is, $15 here, right? Roughly for those cigars. That's a $50 cigar in Canada.
And then you mentioned in Canada too, like you could throw another issue in the mix, which I'm sure this is something that Scott watches too, because it's been argued in the past, but it's like plain packaging, like you can argue
plain packaging.
You can argue like for First Amendment, commercial speech, like taking the right, from these artisan companies, these family legacy companies, and saying that you have to have these disgusting logos covering your artwork and your family crests, and then you go to Canada and they all have those ugly green bands covering. I
have one somewhere down here because Mitchell gave me some Canadian exclusive stuff, and it has the bands on, and I haven't spoken. I'm like, I want to use this, and I wish I thought of it, and I'm like, but I got some of them, and I'm like, I looked and I was like, so this is it, and he's like, that's, and I was like, this is stupid, and he was like, I know.
A lot of regulation does start overseas.
Yeah,
like you see plain packaging over the border in Canada, and it's like if that trickles down here, it's like granted. The general populace of Americans, very small percentage, is like one of those really informed, like premium tobacco smokers. It's a very small industry.
Yeah.
But if plain packaging is regulated, like that is one of the core fundamental principles of what it is to be an American, is having that freedom of speech to be able to market your product that way, and it's
freedom of expression.
Exactly. And if that gets taken,
we won that court case.
Yeah. So I was gonna.
So we won that. Yeah.
But it's the fact that the government attempted to do that, and it's again like people that don't smoke cigars, whatever, who cares, it's cigar but it's one of the fundamental rights of an American to have free speech, and that was just taken. Even if you don't exercise that right by purchasing cigars, or you're not a manufacturer, you don't make the product, that was just infringed on, and that's everyone's right. So it's setting precedents to go forward and potentially regulate similar to other products. So it's just there's a lot of issues that a lot of consumers, it goes unnoticed, but it's very core principles that, if it was in a different context, it would get people very riled up.
Well, let me put it this way. What if you went into a liquor store? Sorry, Scott, but I'm going to make this very quick. Let me put it to you this way for those people, right? Imagine going into a liquor store and everything is in the exact same bottle with a label that just says so-and-so Pinot Noir tequila. It's all in the same bottle. So the same basic label,
and a picture of a fetus that's been destroyed by fetal alcohol syndrome.
Wasn't there a study
exactly
that those images on products actually made people buy them? because it's I don't know if it's like when someone says you can't do it, like I'm
gonna do it anyway.
I remember hearing that there was a study.
It's like the parental advisory warning on all when I was a kid, the cassette tapes and then CDs. You're like, I don't care what it is. I'm buying those ones. I'm buying the ones with the parental advisory on them, right?
Yeah.
So it kind of a similar effect in that regard. So what was interesting in the arguments, the government's arguments when we were doing the case, one of the arguments that came up was, McDonald's menus or the fast food or some of these other things. So they did mandate the nutrition information did have to go on to some of these, for food products. But again, the difference is that's nutrition information for consumer choice and consumer education, as opposed to you don't walk into McDonald's and 30% of their menu is covered up with eating this food will cause you diabetes and heart disease, right? So it's a little bit, so it is interesting because there are examples that they did try to tie into why this should be allowed, right? We did win the court case, but again, that threat still does exist because there are other examples. Matt, yours is a good one because that's a more appropriate comparison. That's a little more apples to apples, is that you don't see any of that regulation coming over alcohol. What's the difference between alcohol and the tobacco industry? Well, number one, the tobacco industry is all tied in directly, master settlement agreement, cigarettes and everything else and the like, of the manipulations of decades past. The second part of that is that alcohol was very, very vigilant and proactive about how they went through and approached basically a self-regulatory mechanism. I've been pounding for years on the fact that we need to start going after a self-regulation environment of ourselves because to Jay's point here, the FDA is never going to turn back. Once the government gets its claws in you, The money, the power, everything else. I mean, a government agency, the Center for Tobacco Products exists for tobacco, so they're not going anywhere. And so now that whole unholy alliance with the FDA and how this all works, they're going to keep coming after us until they put some sort of plan in place. So I've talked about this, when I was with the American College of Radiology, going back when the Center for Medicare and Medicaid wanted to create an accreditation program for mammography. They didn't go create it themselves because it was cheaper just to use the American College of Radiology's mammography program, and they just simply put that into place. So then ACR became one of the accreditors for mammography for that very reason. So there's a lot of precedent that exists for us to do this, right? The same way the Motion Picture Association started rating films because they didn't want the government coming in to censor or to rate what they were doing. They wanted to be able to have that freedom to be able to make their art the way that they wanted to, and decided to rate that system. And that's why they went and got Jack Valenti, who was a former congressman, to come in and head up the MPAA for that very reason. So the same opportunity exists for us now. We do have reprieve. It's coming. I say weird. The premium cigar is the lowest enforcement priority. But the reality is that with everything with Chevron and the deference and everything else that exists there, we have an opportunity to be able to start carving out our own. I say, Miguel's on here, so maybe that's why I have it in my brain. The CYLP. We have a chance to carve our own path here in terms of regulation and how we can actually stipulate this, rather than stomping on our feet and saying we shouldn't be regulated and it's not fair. Nobody ever wins by doing that. Nobody ever wins by doing that. So what we have to do is we've got to be able to create a framework in which we know that we can be successful, that will also answer any of the questions that the regulators are going to ask. They're not particularly organized. They're a bureaucracy. And so if we have an opportunity to show, hey, look, there's no reason to do anything other than what we're doing, which is why alcohol has the ability to exist the way that they exist. They took proactive steps. They're not required, at least I don't think so, correct me if I'm wrong, but I don't believe they're required to put some of the labels that they put on there on all their bottles of liquor and things like that about drink responsibly and things like that.
The Surgeon General's warning?
Yeah, the Surgeon General's warning I think is required, but I don't know. But I don't believe the requirement about drink responsibly and some of those other things. That's something they all got together and decided that they're going to do, right? And so I'm not saying smoke responsibly, but I mean there are things that do exist within our power to be able to create a system that then everybody is like, hey, we're good with this. We don't have to worry about anything coming in, because then when the time comes, we actually have a system and we can have data and we can have everything that we need. I used to call it, we need to build a wall of self-regulation around ourselves, so when they come calling, there's no reason for them to do anything. And then it goes to, I think it's the OMB, the Office of Management Budget, that they look at it. It's going to cost you $452 million to try to create something that's going to do nothing of what they already do. Just put this into place. This happens with other industries, and there's precedent for it. So I think that shame on us if we just sit back and think, oh, hey, we can just take it easy now, because they're not going. The other part too is that they're also going to look and see what's being effective at the local municipality level and the state level, and they're also going to continue to take a look and see. They're going to experiment. They're going to see what works. They're going to see how they can try to hit down the different defenses and things like that. So this is going to be continuous, and that's why we can't stop. Like I said, putting pieces in place, as well as the other thing that Jay said is making sure that we are all coordinated and working from the same playbook, because otherwise, it's too easy to take us down if we're not united.
No, absolutely. Yeah, I like that Jay put that up there. For those who didn't see the comments, the appeal is likely going to be a win. User fees will be a side issue to be resolved later, likely in a separate court. The reality, however, is that FDA has the right to regulate premium cigars under the TCA and will likely come back with a new regulatory structure in the future. So regardless of the removal of Chevron deference, the fight will have to continue. CAA, CRA, and PCA still have much work to do. It's very, very true. Really
and when I was still doing when I was at Twins working there still, that we did a podcast every week, and I said this when the meta decision came down. This is before Chevron, which just adds more to that offensive posture I was speaking of. And I said, the quote that I had was, this isn't a opportunity to not be regulated. It's an opportunity to be regulated the correct way.
Yeah.
Because now it gives the industry a chance to kind of collect ourselves and get, some uniform approach to how we would like to be regulated. Because it's going to happen. So it's either we contribute to it and have it be more fair, or we have, the FDA's teeth kind of sink down on us again, and then we're going to be in another high regulation area down the road. So it's big, and that podcast was following. I'm not going to get into it because it was pretty controversial with the brand, but it was a certain cigar that was released that was very much it could be marketed to children. So it was following a conversation about that. But it's just having like a uniform way, like the do's and don'ts, and then just having something in place, both at the municipal level and then like from like the trade groups, and just having a uniform approach to regulation.
Yeah, I mean, when Carney was on the show in the early years, very frequently, that was one of the things that came up, in conversation. And Carney, I think, said it best. He said, "This is he's been involved in the industry a long time at the manufacturer level, and he was like, look, this is an industry that's just screaming to have someone else regulate us. Like, we have so many opportunities to self-regulate, and he goes, from my point of view and just in my experience, working, as a manufacturer, he's like, this is an industry that's just asking to be regulated by the government, because he brought that up, like what Scott said, with the alcohol industry being able to, self-regulate. Carney said pretty much the same thing. Like, we should be able to self-regulate, but we can't seem to do so, and that's why the government's taken over, because someone's going to regulate us if we don't do it ourselves. And I never really forgot that whole argument that he made, because he's right, and it was a very good point to make. To his credit, it's true, and and then the rest has kind of been history since then. But we've had some good wins and done some good things, but yeah, like Jay said, there's a lot of work to do. I mean, Scott and everyone, they have a lot of work to do.
And my last question to Scott would be, based on policy, would be, so this was probably maybe 6 months before the Meta decision. Again, on that podcast, we talked about, I had it all down pat when I was talking about, but now that it's been a bit, it's kind of faded. So I'll give like the general regulation that was proposed, and I'm sure Scott's going to recognize it. I think it was the FDA, but they were going to do overseas regulation by regulating the factories and have certain requirements. Yeah. So
I remember that.
What is the I'm sure that's on the back burner with everything that's going on, but do you know what the status is with that whole thing?
Yeah, so when we were looking into that, I mean, this was something that was such a fantastical overreach. It was bizarre, because the fact of the matter is that the Dole factory in Nicaragua would have had to shut down too. And so basically what they were trying to do is, and it would have shut down any importation, really, because it was going to try to hold these factories to basically U.S. EPA standards. And so it's like, well, okay, are you going to no more iPhones, because those are all made in factories that don't adhere to the same standards.
Oh, yeah.
It was so crazy, but I know it was very targeted and specific in terms of this. In terms of water usage and some of that aspects and everything else. But again, this is another area where we know effectively kind of where they're going to come from in some of these instances. So this is another area where that self-regulation aspect of it is concerned. There's a great article in the PCA magazine about what Christian Aurora is doing and their sustainable practices and things like that in farming, solar energy, and everything else. There's a lot that we can kind of put together in terms of the story we tell. And in fact, when I was meeting with Congressman Peters' office, who's a Democrat, Southern California, his LD that I was talking to asked about sustainable farming practices. I'm like, that's perfect. I literally just read yesterday this whole article that PCA did on Christian. But that's an important factor as we're looking at on that side of the aisle about sustainable farming practices and how the industry chooses to operate in that type of environment. So these are all pieces that we need to be able to put in place in terms of that self-regulatory wall that I was talking about. Funny thing, too, is it popped up on Twitter, which was kind of funny, or X, rather, is I talked about Andrew Huberman and the use of nicotine. He literally just had this episode where he talks about nicotine, the use of, it can relax, but at the same time he talks about blood pressure. He talks about nicotine pouches and other things. But here's another reason why consumer engagement is very important whenever you see these things. Someone engaged on Twitter because they were talking about all these different aspects of taking in nicotine and everything else. And so there was a great user that was on there saying, like, cigars is the most effective. You don't inhale, it slowly gets absorbed. It's, something that you do only occasionally. More people were piping in about that. Is like, hey, look, it's actually one of the best ways to, if you're going to have nicotine, one of the best, quite frankly, most enjoyable and social ways to enjoy, nicotine at a level. And he even pointed out and linked to the study that shows that up to 2 cigars per day did not show an increase in overall, mortality rates and by other diseases and cancer. So that's all very good to be armed with, right? And so we have, like CAA can provide, PCA has that information, CRA has that information. So that's the engagement that we also want from our consumers, is that when you're in these spaces, particularly social media conversations, which aren't real but can help promulgate, the information that we need, just things like that is very, very helpful, because again, getting within that conversation, because nicotine is going to be where they start shifting this battle, because it's not tobacco anymore, it's nicotine, because these other tobacco products, a lot of them are synthetic, right? Usually made from eggplants, derived from eggplants or other nightshades. So that's gonna come into play, right? And so some of them use tobacco nicotine, others use synthetic nicotine. So I don't see them trying to parse out or do an exemption for tobacco nicotine. I don't think there's anything that they're calling premium nicotine at this point. So I mean, really, ultimately, that's why again, the totality of the category really is going to be under attack. They're going to find any way that they can to make inroads in terms of that. So anyway, that's very important for consumers to be able to engage with us, get information. So again, being able to respond on formats such as that really helps, right? And that's that Overton window that we want to start moving with public opinion. Hey, you know what? Nicotine actually has benefits. Hey, are there responsible ways to actually, use nicotine for our benefit? Yes, here they are. And in fact, companies are spending a lot of money figuring out how we can actually do that in a way and giving adult consumers the choice to be able to do it. So it's a very, very important component with that consumer education.
Yeah, no, very well said. Thank you for sharing that. I mean, it's very true. And again, it's, the last point I'll make before we kind of get towards the end of the show, and I know we got to do the news before we wrap up, but I like how you mentioned the synthetic stuff. You see a lot of that with the vapes, with the vape juices. With all those things. That's all synthetic stuff. That's all made lab in a factory. Those liquids inside those things. Now you see people with like the non-tobacco pouches, like the Zyn pouches and stuff. It's all like there's no tobacco, but it's a nicotine. It's like, where'd all that come from? What's all that made from? You know what I mean? And you're worried about tobacco leaves that were organically grown and tended by hand and rolled by hand and fermented by hand, and you're more concerned about that than this other stuff that's coming up from China and in factories and it's all synthetic. It's like, I'd be more concerned about that. That's scarier to me. It's just made in a factory somewhere. You don't know what's in there. I mean, that's pretty scary if you ask me. You're breathing that stuff into your lungs. I'd be more worried about that.
Well, what's really interesting is that this country is very different because it's a lot more popular overseas, and the way that it was actually brought to market overseas was very different because it was introduced as harm reduction, right? For those, instead of smoking cigarettes, you want to come in for harm reduction, and these were the means and the avenue to do that. In this country, it was obviously usurped by some different actors, and so it was pretty interesting. To leave on a positive note for overseas, we had Paul Veracas, who's the Director General of the European Cigar Manufacturers Association. He visited our annual meeting, and what's interesting is that there's been a little bit of political shift over there with the European Union, with a lot of new incoming representatives of that body, that he was saying are a little bit more conservative than previous generations. And so starting to see some headways in terms of trying to gain a little bit of ground. So it's another reason why the work that we can do here in the U.S., and that's why when Josh and I started to go over to Dortmund to talk about, hey, here's what we've done in the U.S. and here's how we hope it can translate. And so, offering the things like the past studies and some of the other tactics that we've employed that have been successful, that can start to promulgate. So that's another reason why partnerships like with ECMA, the European Cigar Manufacturers Association, the Canadian Cigar Association, and others helps, because that sharing of information and that helpful use of tactics and how we go about things can definitely be translated, I think, in other countries and other places to help push this forward. We can't stay on defense. We have to go on offense too. We have to start moving the needle a little bit more. And I think that we have a really good opportunity here in the U.S., and I think that can kind of help spread to at least some other more incremental steps in other places around the world.
Absolutely. Well, thank you for saying that, Scott. We are going to pivot towards our news segment. Really, I'm watching the time, and wow, I can't believe we've already been on here for almost 2 hours. This has been quite the show. Thank you for hanging in here with us, Scott. I really appreciate the time.
Absolutely. That'll be Josh is going to give me crap about talking too much again, so that's okay.
Hey, no one talks more than Carney. So, actually, I don't know. I feel like Saka might have Carney beat at this point, but I love them both. But no, it is time for our news segment once again, featuring Micallef Cigars, featuring the new Color Series, the black, blue, now the red, which was actually, I don't think it's published yet, but recently reviewed by Pat, which will be up on the website soon. And Pat, this week, I think you said you had some news this week. So what's the haps? What's the haps?
So the JC Newman announced that they're doing their Make Your Own Cigar program.
Oh yeah, I saw that.
So I found that to be really interesting because I've always wanted someone to do that, and it's nice that they're capitalizing on having an Elroy factory and then having all their uses, like oldest cigar factory that's still functioning in America, and then utilizing their high amounts of tobacco they have overseas. So what they have is anyone can do it. You go to the website, I think it's if you just go on their main website, it's just one of the main prompts on the sidebar up top. But you can purchase your own custom blend. So what they do is there is a buy minimum. I think you have to buy 80 cigars. They're 30 cigars a piece. It comes out to I think it's just under $3,000. But you can pick a wrapper, binder, and then 3 filler leaves from all their tobacco. It's not everything that they have. Like they don't have like Florida Sun-Grown, for instance, that they use in the American, but they have most of what they do. And you can make a personalized cigar, and you have like a confrontation for it. You pick your component tobacco, they're blended, then you can age it from 3 to 12 months depending on what your preference would be. And then you get them shipped in like a really extravagant leather 20-count box. So I just thought that was really interesting because it's to my knowledge the first time anyone's done that. Open to pretty much anyone in the public. Because usually if you do like a private label, you have to buy like a very large amount of quantity to do. Yeah. But this is like a more and then if you do that, then you're probably trying to sell them. And you got to get like a distro license. It goes from there, yeah. And it's something that even I've asked about casually with because we know a lot of manufacturers and it's been offered to me, which I considered doing when my daughter was born, and there was a few people I talked to, and it was like, yeah, you had to do like a minimum. And that's the thing, because again, it's like you can do it, but I mean you got to pay for it. Like when I would be at the shop, you would have people coming in for weddings and like getting like It's a Boy, It's a Girl cigars. Right. And it's funny because like usually, I'm not saying that they're cheap cigars, but it's not like a top line elite level cigar from companies that are marketed like It's a Boy, It's a Girl. It's typically like their core line, maybe like lower core line. It's not a Davidoff Grand Cru. Yeah. Yeah, I mean, it's nice that you can you can like if you have a wedding, like you can have a personalized cigar. It's if you talk about wedding planning, now the guy gets something that with even more significance too. Yeah, and then they keep custom. They keep the exact blends on record. So say like you get married 5 years down the road, you have a child, they can replicate that exact blend to be able to then provide to you. Yeah, you can reorder it and get more, and maybe you change the band, but your blend is the same. Yeah, and the band's custom too. You have complete control over the marketing for it as well. So I just thought that was a really unique approach that they're doing. And I also had a question for Scott is I'm wondering how they get the blends approved. I don't know if that's because of a pause of the FDA regulation, but I don't know how that works. Substantial equilance? Yeah. Yeah, that's a good point. I don't know if it's...
SC doesn't exist, so it doesn't matter.
Okay. Yeah. Yeah, that's true. It doesn't exist, so...
that whole process to me was... I don't know how that possibly would have worked. I mean, one little leaf here. It's the same... It's the same thing for me with the characterizing flavor, because the word characterizing flavor, all three of our palates are different. We're going to taste cigars differently. The word characterizing, what does that even mean? And quite frankly, probably 80% of cigar products would probably have to come off the market if you're just going to give that broad overview, right? If you use any tobacco, if they're aged in anything that would even impart a little bit of flavor, then they go in to try to regulate that. To your point earlier, the manufacturer standards, or they're going to go in to see how these things are made. So many products would be at risk.
Yeah, it's true, and thank God that we don't have to deal with that. It's like you said, it's just another one of those things. It's like it's so ridiculous. How do you even like enforce that? But getting back to what Pat was talking about, yeah, I think it's cool. I looked at it briefly, and I can't. You don't happen to remember the prices on some of that, do you? I think everything together, because the consultation I think is $300 maybe, but it comes out. I think it was like $2,750 to be able to get the whole thing. The whole thing, because you have to get the 80 cigar minimum, and it's $30 a stick plus the consultation fee. And they're all made at El Reloj. Yep, everything's handmade there. Okay. And then you can go in person to do it as well, but they also do like a Zoom meeting consultation as well if you want to do it remotely. Interesting. Very interesting. Yeah, we'll have to get one of the Newmans on here again soon. I know Bobby was on a few months ago, but I've been wanting to get Drew on. I don't think we've had Drew on the show, but I'd love to get Drew on, and then we can really like pick his brain on that. I'll have to shoot an email over there, because I have more questions, because it's an interesting concept, and to your point, I think it is the first program of its kind available just to the general public. So lots of questions there, and hopefully this
Maybe it catches on. Maybe it becomes a thing. I don't know. But that's our news for this week. Once again, brought to you by Micallef Cigars. Well, Scott, I love having you on the show. I'm so happy that you came. I'm happy you're here. I'm happy that you're doing well with the CAA. Just thank you for the time as usual. I always appreciate your time. I know you're a very busy guy. Coming and hanging out with us on here for a couple hours it's awesome. So thank you. I appreciate it.
And thank you for everything
thanks so much for having me. Oh no, my pleasure. It was fun. I got to our annual meeting, stand up and talk a little bit about our team and just say, we relish being the tip of the spear for everybody just because, we have such a love and passion for this industry. I know how much it means to me, in all the facets of being able to enjoy cigars that people I've met. And like I said earlier, right, there's a lot of people who have poured so much of their lives into their companies, their careers, that all are around this product that it's unconscionable to me that a handful of crusaders would want to do away with something that means so much to so many people. And that's why that's why I will tell personal stories about certain things that have affected me and why it is important. So I appreciate, you all so much for having me on, for being willing to have a conversation, which I know might, bore some of your folks to tears. Would rather talk about, Saka's new blends or, I've got the new cutter that he released because, I just lost his name. I saw him in Chicago, who gave me their new replaceable blade guillotine that Dunbarton did. So I know that there's a lot more exciting topics that are out there for people to talk about on the Smokin Tabacco show. But I appreciate you having on and for all the work that you do. And so keep it up. And Pat, good to see you again, man. And glad that you're going to be on the show. And definitely stay in touch. And hopefully we'll be able to do some more fun things in the future.
Absolutely.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, thank you, Scott, and Pat. Thanks for being here. Obviously,
thanks for having me.
I'm excited to embark on this journey together.
I'll try not to bore the audience every week with
stuff.
But
Here's my legal corner. Yeah. That could be a segment, Pat's legal corner. We'll have to work with that. I don't know. But anyway, guys, that's going to be our show this week. Scott, thank you again. I appreciate it. It's always good to see you. Don't forget to like and subscribe and visit SmokinTabacco.com for more news, reviews, and updates from the cigar industry. We'll be back Saturday night with the Spare Notes series with William Cooper, and we'll see you then. Take care, everybody.